Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Healthcare Business Women's Association Just in Time with Julie program here on Blab, where we discuss edgy business topics. We talk the real deal, and everybody gets to have something to say, ask the questions, everything that maybe you don't want to raise your hand and pose them in front of a large group. You can pose in front of this group because we want to hear your questions. I am so excited tonight about this topic. Gender parity. Gender parity, what's on your report card? So some of you are probably saying, what's gender parity? So I went ahead and I Googled gender parity. How many hits do you think I got 2 days ago? 1,690,000 results. Definition, gender parity, equality among women and men. And then there's even a gender parity index called the GPI. Who knew? And it's a socioeconomic index usually designed to measure the relative access to education of males and females.
Wow.
And it's calculated as the quotient of the number of females by the number of males enrolled in given stage of education. So I guess it's females divided by males, something like that. But who knew? I never knew there was a quotient like that. But according to Mark Weinberger, the global chair and CEO of E&Y, Ernst Young, in 2014, the World Economic Forum released an unsettling report that based on current trends, it would be another 81 years before women achieved economic equality in the workplace. And then by November 2014, the news actually got worse, far worse. According to the forum's latest findings, the estimate is now 118 years. I will be long gone, as will a lot of my great-grandchildren, all pushing up daisies somewhere. That's crazy. So we're looking at 2133 before we have an equal fed at the table, an equal paycheck. No, thank you. So there's study after study is confirming that you really empowering women in their workplace isn't just the right thing to do. It's a smart thing for business to do. There's lots of data to support that companies do better when there's more diversity at the top. So enough about this overview because we have a tremendous group here joining in this conversation. And I'm happy to invite Sarah Roberts to help us lead this discussion. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah is an executive director in the advisory science practice of Ernst Young. In addition to that, she's a mom and a wife and an author. And she's done a lot of interesting things, so many interesting things that Ernst Young gobbled her up. So I'm going to let Sarah talk about how that happened, but she's really excited because I mentioned she was an author. She's got a great book coming out that you're all going to want to go buy after you hear this program today. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little about yourself, your book, and this research at E&Y that you've been working on that's really disturbing to me. Thanks, Sarah.
Really disturbing. Yeah, parts of it are, absolutely. But I hopefully am not the disturbing part. Anyway, hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Roberts, and nice to be on this chat. As Julie had said, I'm an executive director with Ernst Young, EY, and help to lead their purpose-led transformation practice. And so over the last 12 years or so, I'm fairly new to EY. Over the last 12 years, I have ran my own boutique consultancy. I'm based here in San Francisco. And what I focus on, as you could probably tell from my title, is really helping companies to lead transformation through purpose and become more purpose-led companies. And really, as you hopefully could ascertain, this idea of what is a purpose-led company? Well, purpose-led companies are also diverse companies. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through it today. And one of the other things that Julie had mentioned is that I have a book that's coming out actually on Tuesday. So it's been a long time coming, but it's called Nimble, Focused, Feisty. And it's organizational cultures that win in the new era and how to create them. I have a copy just right here. And actually, this talks all about how companies that lead with purpose, they create teams that are very diverse in background, race, gender, thought. and really how that drives more innovation. It drives more flexibility. It allows companies to really be much more effective. And so that's a little bit of framing, and I'll share more about it as we go throughout our conversation today.
Right, fascinating topic. So you've done a lot of work, and I know you share a lot of research from E&Y. Can you talk a little bit about that research and this whole concept of diversity as a core of purpose-led companies? That whole concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. The reason I chose to come to EY, EY actually acquired my firm about 6 months ago, so it's fairly recently. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that really attracted me to EY is the fact that we are a very purpose-led company ourselves. Mm-hmm. Our purpose is building a better working world. And the point around the research, EY has really made, this is really what drew me to EY. EY has really made quite an investment and commitment in advancing gender parity. And in fact, being that I'm a woman leader myself, they were very persuasive in saying, come to EY. We really want to. We really are on a mission to advance this, and we really want you to be a part of helping us to build a better working world as well. To that end, on this research, EY does a lot of different endeavors, different initiatives in advancing women. And this particular research, as you had mentioned, the quote around what Mark Weinberger said, EY commissioned research and released a report at the World Economic Forum in the fall of 2014. And in this research, basically surveyed male and female leaders of 400 different companies from around the world on the accelerators and the barriers to women's advancement in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And essentially, a subsection of that focuses just specifically on life sciences. So some of the data that I'll share today in this, in this sub-report of gender diversity in life sciences, I think it's really interesting to look at where are life sciences in comparison to many other sectors, and how far do we really still need to go.
Wow. So we also have Laurie Lucas and Liz Stuke, and they are both with the Healthcare Business Women's Association, who has a real focus on making things better in the workplace for women from a gender parity perspective. I think it's probably our #1 initiative, if you not say, ladies. So they're going to be providing some commentaries to go along and posing some questions. So, Sarah, you mentioned about life sciences. Could you kind of tell us where life sciences are in all of this? Because for our association, this is so critical to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So life sciences, I'll share a little bit of context just to give a little bit of the high level as food for thought. But what we learned about life sciences is that as a sector are a few interesting things. Now, this point may not be as interesting because this might be a bit of a no-brainer. But in the research, when we talk about and learned, across men and women, one of the data points is that 96% of people believe that their organizations need to change in response to disruptive trends in their sector. Now, pairing along with that, so if there's this 96% of people saying, absolutely, we need transformation, 96% of those agree that diversity of thought will be key in helping those companies to navigate changes. And so, essentially what it's saying is life sciences, as we are all aware of, I think, like many industries, is a sector in transition. And all of this increasing pressure is really causing us to say, we can't solve this with the same thinking that got us here. What got us here won't get us there. Famous quote. A couple other data points are that 72% believe that gender diversity on the leadership team improves financial performance, while 84% believe that it improves non-financial performance. So those are pretty high stats. And essentially what it's saying is that in this longitudinal research, when it comes to the need for greater diversity, life sciences respondents believe absolutely that we have a long ways to go. I will say the interesting thing is life sciences, in terms of stacking up against other cross-sector peers, they seem to do it pretty well. But I would say it's still, this industry can be a front runner, but there's still a long ways to go. And I'll share that more as we go into some additional research. But, I'm curious with all of you too, what have you seen? And as we unpack this research, and then more importantly, what can we do to continue to advance this? I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts as well.
So Sarah, I think you really teed that up. There's an audio issue. I'd love to hear how you interpret the information in terms of, this is an area that is good for business. It's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. And so how come we're not making the progress that we might think?
Yeah, it's, it's a great point. And I think you're going to find some things in here that are, I don't know, interesting. Julie said disturbing, but I think it's also, I think there are some viewpoints around that, and I think you'll be able to ascertain some of it too. Let me share a little bit. When I think about why is this so, or why does it still seem bleak, even in life sciences companies? So, and I'll say 90% believe that new leadership skills will be needed for the future. 73% say they need to transform how they attract, retain, and promote talent. 53% agree that women are the single biggest underutilized pool of talent in the industry. But, and here's the downside, is that 20% only 20% have a formal program to identify women's leadership careers. Only 39% measure their progress around diversity, and only 12%, okay, so this is about a 10th, expect a significant increase in the proportion of women occupying leadership positions within the next 5 years. So to your point, Liz, absolutely. When I think about why is this, yes, we believe this, just as you said, it's important. It's critical to performance, both financial and non-financial performance. We need to spur innovation, having diversity of thinking. I think one of the things is part of the reason maybe really that men and women differ on the opportunities. And I'll share that a little bit more.
I agree with you, with Sarah. When I have conversations and I talk about this, and I've been in life sciences my entire career, and when I'm job shopping and I'm looking to make a change, I go to the company, I go to their board, and that tells me everything. And I wish I could say that I've seen the needle move a lot in the years that I've been in the industry. Yeah. And unfortunately, like I said, disturbing. I find that really disturbing. We know it's beneficial to business and people are recognizing it. But as long as the people at the top aren't going to put it on a key performance index or measure that or make that initiative, it's just not going to happen. And I would say that part of the research is really, to me, where the opportunity lies. Who's going to put it on their radar? Right? Yeah. Who's going to say, this is my company and this is what we're doing? Does anybody have any examples where we're doing that other than the HBA?
Julie, I have something to add to that because I agree with you. I think it's a matter of putting it on your radar. But I think part of starting this is to have a conversation about it, right? To address some of those unseen barriers. And I actually ran across an interesting article. It was actually published in the Harvard Business Review. And Arminia Ibarra, who did a career conversations session with HBA last fall, was one of the lead authors on that series. And she talks about unseen barriers, right? Invisible barriers that keep women from ascending into those ranks. And she talks about the importance of starting to talk about what those unconscious biases are, and that's how we can start to uproot that, is to have some of those conversations around some of those unconscious biases, whether it's about gender and how we expect women to behave in the workplace versus men, whether it's looking at leadership skills and how a lot of those leadership skills that we attribute to successful leaders are very much male kinds of skills versus women types of skills, like collaboration and things like that, and how women are perceived if they act more masculine. So I think part of it is having some discussions about those kinds of hidden barriers and making us all more aware of them.
I want to put one out there. Women are emotional, and men are just, women get emotional when they have an idea that's controversial. Men are controversial and women are emotional. Right? The whole thing about how you go about challenging and the perception of when you challenge someone, the way it's interpreted. You're aggressive. I'm going to put that one. You're aggressive, or am I assertive? Am I just being assertive, and now you're putting aggression on me because I'm a woman? So of course I get that one, but and I'll own that. But I will say that I hear that time and time again. Oh, she didn't get the CEO job because they thought she was too aggressive. Like, well, she's trying to be the leader of the company. What do you expect? Of course she's going to be aggressive. She's responsible for the running of an organization. So, put that out there.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's incredibly important. I mean, it's interesting that not just around unconscious bias, but the interesting thing is misperceptions. So it's not, I'll share a couple of data points that I think are good food for thought. The research that we did here at EY, it suggested that there's a chasm between how women perceive what they need and what their organizations are doing for them very differently than men do. So I'll give you a couple examples. So as men and women were asked, which of the following are most valuable in helping women reach leadership positions in your organization? Women said that by a wide margin, was that they needed mentoring from senior leaders. Now, it's interesting. Men, on the other hand, ranked that as the lowest priority. And I'll situate on this for a second. And another one, the second most important opportunity from a woman's perspective was networking opportunities. Men perceived that as second lowest priority. So conversely, men said women would advance in the workplace if there were more strong female role models in the organization and flexible work arrangements. Now, that's really interesting because women don't perceive it as the same. Along that lines, and this is really truly where, men are, what do they say? Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. But in all seriousness, when unpacking the research even more, when they talked about the barriers, men perceive predominantly that the number one reason the barriers exist for women is in conflict with raising a family. Women said that very, very low responded that as a conflict. In fact, I'll tell you on the second one that men said was the biggest barrier was a shortage of available female candidates. Not a single woman answered that as a priority. So again, it's perception. It's saying, basically men are saying, you know what? There's tons of issues. Women, have all these conflicts with raising a family. We have a shortage of available female candidates. While women are like, absolutely, that's not the problem. And so we just don't view it the same.
Right.
Well, that's nothing new, right? Go ahead.
Exactly.
Well, I to add to that point, I agree with you. We just don't view it the same. And I think the other thing too is that if you look at a lot of our traditional environments, they were created by men.
Yeah.
So of course, men are very comfortable in those environments. And then that's when you hear from women that, hey, I need more networking, I need more mentoring, because I'm trying to fit into an environment that isn't natural to me.
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, it's time and time again, and I think some of the HBR stuff you referenced and other that I've read is, you know, a lot of times this unconscious bias sometimes filters into how job descriptions get written. It filters into how performance reviews are done. So in every kind of aspect, it's, you know, again, I don't want to just chalk it up to it's a man's world and we're just living in it. But I mean, but in a way, it's part of it that that has to be recognized by both men and women to really advance this together. And I think that's all part of the equation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think especially when you start to look at the research that you started with, Sarah, at the very beginning that talked about the need for transformation and the need to change how we're doing things from a business perspective so that we get different business outcomes, it all marries together, right? If we need to change that so that we have better business outcomes and so we have diversity in thought, then we have to change how we operate so that we are more inclusive to all and it's a more natural environment to everyone.
Absolutely. You know, there's something interesting, Julie, about what you said before, and you were mentioning about, you know, I think one of the accelerators absolutely is speeding up company culture change with progressive corporate policy. But I will tell you the interesting thing, and this was part of some research that's been done recently. This is not EY. This was some other research that I read, that basically many companies out there are doing all these programs to reduce bias and increase diversity. But in fact, this is interesting. Some of these efforts are actually making matters worse. And you want to know why? It's saying because most diversity programs focus on controlling managers' behavior. And actually, as the studies show, that approach tends to activate bias rather than to squash it. So actually, because people rebel against rules that threaten their autonomy, when you create corporate policy as an example, and you enforce it, say we have to have these quotas, so on and so forth, you have to hire this many, it actually flies in the face of progress.
Oh my gosh, that's really interesting. That, you know, we think that we're trying to make things better, but we're actually making it more difficult.
That's right. And some of the interesting things, I think, and I would love to hear your feedback or have other folks join in with us and share their experience, is it says that they've seen companies get better results when they actually ease up on the control tactics. So it says it's more effective to engage managers in solving the problem, increasing their on-the-job contact with female and minority workers, and promote social accountability, so that it really goes to people's identity, where a manager would say, absolutely, I'm a person who's very inclusive and encourages diversity, and I hire people from all walks of life. And it's more about their identity rather than it was something they were told to do. So I think it's a really interesting tact, and maybe even counterintuitive to how a lot of companies are approaching it.
Right. I want to share a comment from one of our participants, and this is from Laurie Cook, and she's the CEO of the HBA. She says, diversity is about what makes people unique and good, to have different perspectives at the table. But inclusion is having a culture that embraces all members so they can feel that they can bring their whole selves to the table. So, you know, focus on the inclusion and that you'll get better outcomes. I remember when in a big company, I was told the way that I got promoted was by doing X, Y, and Z, and there were all these rules. And I understand that I didn't like being told what I had to do. I like being told how and being responsible for my business outcomes. And I think we have to take a look at what are the goals? What are the expectations? If you give someone the expectations, then they have to come up with how they're going to get there. And it's not necessarily lots of rules and regulations about who, what, where, and why. It's saying this is what I want it to look like at the end. Now go do it. Make sure that this happens, and that you have to see the value in building that inclusive environment. And again, diversity is one thing. Inclusion is making everybody feel welcome. You can have as many different people in your workplace, but if you're not bringing everybody together, then you're not going to get the results.
Absolutely. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Right. So, how is diversity driving transformation and performance, Sarah? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, I do. So, as we talked about, obviously this is a time of transformation for life sciences. And it's interesting that when you kind of break it down, women actually see a greater need for transformation than men do. So it was 73% versus 52% respectively. And by some margin, sector life sciences respondents considered the most influential factor on their sector to come from. So this is what they said was the most influential factor in driving transformation was coming from payers demanding cheaper drugs through discounts or pay for performance. But interestingly enough, less than 1/5, so 18%, believe that they're very prepared to meet this challenge. And so when they looked at the kind of transformation that needs to take place, so the kind of innovation, the kind of capabilities, if you will, it's interesting that it is that there is new thinking that is needed, because essentially what it says is that we have not built or cultivated the kind of skills that are needed for this kind of transformation. And this is precisely what requires diversity of experiences, of thought, etc. There's a couple more things might be interesting food for thought for our viewers. I had mentioned this, maybe this is a little redundant, but 2/3, so 67% of sector leaders agree strongly that diversity is key. Women agree more strongly, however, on the power of diversity in terms of advancing transformation with our organizations. And then another couple things are, as I mentioned in the onset, is that life science organizations believe that diversity makes a positive contribution to performance. And so the 3/4, 73% believe that it improves financial performance, and then 84% asserts that it improves non-financial performance. And so they're really looking for the impact and looking for transformation. And this is where, when they talk about, how diversity drives transformation and performance, it's because we believe that diversity affects the both financial and non-financial results, and we believe that diversity is absolutely the key to what's needed to get our organizations through the next mile, particularly in this VUCA and volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment.
Right. It's like the research is there. We know we need to do it, right? And whether man or woman, male or female, we know that there's value. There's definitely value in making our workforce more diverse. But why are we not doing anything about it? Why is there so little change in that needle, especially in life sciences?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, part of it, certainly there has been some insufficient action, and I think we talked about some of these reasons before. So there's been insufficient action to address the gender diversity gap. I think there's also been a bit of a lack of appetite for change. And so the interesting thing, I think, again, I'll share some data points, is that 3/4 agree that they need to be doing more as an organization to attract, retain, and promote women into leadership position. Certainly, though, women are much more likely to agree with that sentiment. So 85% versus 64% of men. And the interesting thing is life sciences organizations also most lack a structured approach to developing female leaders. So maybe I mentioned this before, but only 20% have a formal program to identify women's leadership careers, and only 4% have an informal program that they intend to formalize. And the data says that just under half of companies have no formal program in place and don't intend to change.
And that's mind-boggling to me. It's just mind-boggling to me because, again, why don't we want to change this? Is it because it requires work? Is it that there's lack of knowledge of the best way to do it? Is it because it requires investment? And I think maybe all three. Laurie, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's all three because, as Laurie Cook pointed out in the comments, that the business case is so strong, right? And it continues to be validated. This is no longer a woman's story. It's a business story, right? It's about transformation, and that, we need to have greater diversity of thought in order to do that. And so I agree. I think, the business case is there. And I think you're right. I think it's because it's hard to do. I think it's because people don't exactly know how to do it. And, I wonder too, if some of it is that, men are a little bit afraid to do it, right? Because suddenly we're asking them to change and to change the environment that they're so comfortable in, right? And that's going to require them to get a little bit uncomfortable.
Is there any industry or any, maybe ex-US, is anybody doing this well in another country? Is it such a big deal? I know in some countries women don't even have a voice, but in countries that are a lot more progressive, are they doing a better job of this? Do we have any information on that?
Well, it's interesting. I don't have that handy, although I will say that I know that by and large, the social sector is they have really done something right in terms of they're very diverse. And so we're talking about nonprofits, we're talking about the NGO world, and so it's interesting that when you look at that, and this is a little bit anecdotal on my part, but it's like there is a much greater diversity mix, and it's probably because of just what women have been cultivated to do in the past in terms of that they really pursue careers in these realms. So I think part of it, all this stuff kind of commingles is I really do believe we're getting better with STEM education, and particularly in terms of targeting young girls and females to really go into these areas. But I think we're seeing, some of the effects of the delay of it's not to say there aren't these women leaders. We absolutely need to look harder. I don't want to use that as an excuse, but I think you will see there is a propensity of women in the social sector, like I was talking about, and that's what we really have to do is build the same kind of supportive environments within life sciences. For those folks to be able to flourish, and for them for women to be able to build a career and to be able to stay in that career and prosper.
Right. I have a comment from one of our attendees. There are wonderful examples of other countries that set quotas and require companies to state their family representation at the senior level and boards, and they're getting much better results. So where someone has called somebody on the carpet and said, you need to report out, that seems to be having a good effect in some other countries.
That's right.
And then we also have CEW.org. We had a participant, Marianne Frey. They're doing a great job. So there's two examples there. Maybe there's some best practices we can learn from that organization, and from some of these countries that are knocking it out of the park are doing a much better job than we are here in the U.S.
Right. And I think...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of advancing this, I think it's when we all realize that this is just like one of those comments said. This isn't a woman's issue or a woman's story. It's a business story, And there are ways specifically that both men and women can help in advancing this. And so I think that's part of it is really appealing. You know, when you ask why not, why are we not making the investment? I mean, partially it's that we think we are, or just like Laurie said, that, you know, we don't know exactly what to do. And I would say there are definitely some ways to put one foot in front of the other. And there are very specific things that men can do to help support women advancing. Sure, some men are absolutely going to, what would I say, view gender equality as zero sum. So meaning that if women win, men must lose. But I don't think that's the case by and large. And so I think it's a matter of going out and appealing to men and women, not necessarily just enforcements or mandates. That's important. That could be an accelerator, but making sure that you appeal to people on why this is an issue, why this will bring better results, and be able to inspire them.
Right. Now, Sarah, you mentioned that there may be some accelerators, like recommendations for maybe organizations that want to make a change and want to have more diversity across their organization for better outcome. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And any participant who's on the blab as well, you can certainly follow up afterwards for you to get access to these reports and do accelerators. I have a little bit of a cheat sheet here. This is something that I handed out at a recent presentation, but there's three big accelerators that were found for women in the workplace through this particular study. And one is really around illuminating the path to leadership. So what does that mean? And I'll share some more tactical things in a little bit as well. But what does illuminating the path to leadership mean? Is that we have to really define opportunities for advancement, make role models visible, and then set leadership pipeline programs and targets. You know, we have to have some guardrails and metrics. The second accelerator I had brought up before is to speed up company culture change with progressive corporate policy. So this is really around accommodating flexibility, work-life integration for all. And then the third, I would say, is to build supportive environments. So it's making a difference through tone at the top. That's really, really critically important. Sponsorship for promotions, education about conscious and unconscious bias. And I'll say with that caveat is that versus it feeling like a control mechanism or mandatory, it's really around how do we work with all managers to build this environment in a way where they can take real ownership over it.
Right. Hey, Sarah, or anybody, can we speak to the difference between sponsorship and mentorship? Because I think some people get that confused, and the expectations are a little different.
That's a great, Laurie or Leah, would you like to take that? I can talk about that too.
And I think one of the best people that I hear have explained this is Laurie Cook. So I believe that we are mentored all through our career. No matter where you are, you have a boss. And then the sponsorship, I always think back to when I was in New Orleans and I was in the opera juniors, and no one's going to laugh at that, okay? Because they're going to say, oh yeah, that's you. But to get into the opera guild, where you had all of the New Orleans elite, you had to be sponsored. You had to have good word of mouth. You had to have women who showed you certain things, much different from mentoring. I was sponsored into the Opera Guild, and I would have not made it by mentoring, but along the way, I've had mentoring throughout my career.
Absolutely. Right. So it's great to get the feedback, but it's really hard to get the leg up, or for someone to actually put their name behind your name
That's
and push
right.
you forward. And that's what's gonna really move the needle. So I have another Laurie Cook pearl here. Men as true gender partners are amazingly effective accelerators.
They are.
So,
Yes.
doing a better job of leveraging successful men to know that they will only be better leaders if they bring along successful and powerful women behind them.
So have we asked Laurie Cook to call in? Is Laurie, are you listening so you can call in?
I don't know.
I'll give up my seat.
I'll
Laurie,
give up my seat for Laurie Cook.
Right. But we have Marianne Frey has just given us some great information. Sponsorship's about advocacy. Mentorship is about supporting talent. The sponsors have your back in the rooms where decisions regarding your future are being discussed. That's where the rubber meets the road. So I think, again, just echoing that, two different things. There's lots of people who tell you what you need to do, but not a lot of people that are, again, pull you up and throw your name in a hat. So and I think, why is that? I think that would be such a game changer if everybody could bring one person along and up and have the responsibility to do that. Think about a corporate policy where, you have to develop and grow X number of people in a year and see who they pick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
I have something to add to that. It's that whole helping the next one in line. And I saw Laurie Cook just sent in a note about sending the elevator back down.
That's right.
But it is the whole idea that we bring the next group behind us along and we pull them along. And then there was also a great comment that Kelly Connors had a few minutes ago. And she said, when we were talking about how do we start to make some of these changes, and one of her comments was that when we talk about it in terms of gender, it's very polarizing and it becomes very political. And maybe what we need to do is talk about it in terms of innovation and the need to change and to transform. And that seems more all-inclusive. Kelly, I don't see your comment anymore, but I hope I got that right. If I didn't, please feel free to pipe in on that. But I thought that was a really interesting point that, yes, she's right, that when we start to talk about gender, it becomes very political and polarizing rather than inclusive. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, and I think it's, to your point, I think it's very hard to look through everyone's lens. I can look through some people's lens, but particularly when we think about it, do we really know what men think about women that they work beside in the workplace? We might all be surprised. So we do have to, I don't know, Sarah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. It's interesting. I think it's really important to have these conversations, right? Like, I think we have to open this up, and this has to be, a real. And this is what I'd say. Like, so many times we create these programs, and it comes from a head of diversity and inclusion. And really what diversity and inclusion, I think, is everyone's job. And so we really have to facilitate these conversations and get to know each other better and be able to break down these barriers and say, what can I do to be an advocate? So, I mean, I think it starts with fostering comfort and empathy and people eager to say, yes, let's just have a conversation about this. Versus wait for someone from diversity and inclusion to pass something down. Yeah.
I think you're right. Go ahead, Julie.
We've got a great comment here from Helen Cook. When it comes to achieving diversity and inclusion headway, someone who is not of a particular group, women group in this case, can be compelling by being vocal on behalf of that group. It's powerful leverage. And I think the HBA, we have the honorable mentor every year where we recognize a man who has really helped and pulled a lot of women up. And again, having an advocate that's not in that group is really a strong voice for that group.
And year after year, what we hear are those men that are our honorable mentors. They want us to stand up. They are telling us, they're our biggest supporters. And I love that. I think that's what HBA brings to the table.
Yeah. I'd be curious. Look, I see this comment over here. I think it's Laurie. She says, I belong to a CEO group and most of the members are men, and the dialogue is quite different than the dialogue I hear in my HBA circles. Yeah, I hear you, sister. And Debbie, hi, Debbie, I recognize you. She's like, exactly. And it's true. And it's interesting. I mean, I do say we have to, it does get to be a conversation where we have to be very pragmatic and action oriented about it. I mean, we are the ones sitting on the other side, a lot of us females being like, well, how do we crack this? But part of it could just be about how do we approach this conversation differently, and how do we do it in a way that really bridges this gap through action.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Kelly Connors brings up a great point. Women are not small men. We do things differently, right? We are different. How can we find that common place where we really, when we're all together in a room, that the conversation is something that everybody can participate in.
That is a great comment.
Right, and I think oftentimes, I'll use an example. Women have different types of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
We know, we get deeper. We know a whole lot about everybody in our relationships. I'll ask my husband. He has lunch with someone every day. And when we were first together, he's been having lunch every day with this man for, I want to say 8 years. And I asked, where'd he go to law school? Does he have a family? Where'd he grow up? And he goes, I don't know. I said, how can you sit and have lunch with somebody every day
and not know anything about them?
Yeah. So I'm saying that's just an example, because their conversation is different. So I guess, what is that common conversation we all can have? And maybe that's part of how we can crack this nut of how, we can really leverage talent and move the needle forward.
Well, and I think so much starts with ourselves. I'm sorry, Sarah, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I had written down a few things to chat about, like, what are 5 different ways that men can support women, and what are 5 ways that women can really take their own ownership. And I was wondering if I could tee those up for some framing, and love to hear other folks' comments about what are some other ways.
Sure.
So we've talked about a few of these, but 5 ways that I think women can really take action within their own organizations. This is going to sound trite. I hope it doesn't. But number 1, I want to believe in your own potential. And so, meaning, if you have the ambition to become a leader within the life sciences sector, then take the steps to achieve it, and don't let anyone hold you back. The second one, and so part of it is and some of you may have read this. I think Anne-Marie Slaughter had written a lot about this sometime back around the confidence gap, right? And there's no reason for us as women, I think we tend to be more straightforward. And if we feel like we're not, this is what Sheryl Sandberg says all the time, like, if, are we really prepared to lean in? Men lean in all the time. We have to be able to lean in and go with that and believe in our potential. Another thing women can do to take action is to play the field. So leaders benefit from a breadth of experience. So the other thing I would say is get it early on, not by tying yourself down to a single specialty or an area of focus, but the knowledge that you gather from all these experiences will prove invaluable when you reach a leadership position, if that's what you want to do. Along the lines of the next one, be confident and take risks. I mentioned this. Women are notorious for not applying for that position that they don't feel completely qualified for. It's time to stop that. I had an interesting, trying to remember, I wrote down something else. I saw this as part of a study. In one recent study I saw, women, by and large, after having poor interviews, so imagine you go to a series of different interviews, they quit trying or pursuing a job after 2 times versus 7 times for men. So meaning, if you have bad interviews, women will just say, oh, it's not for me, I must not be competent enough. Men will persevere 7 times over 2 times. So that's it's interesting, and it's about being confident and taking risks. And I think setting your own priorities, knowing what your priorities are and your passions and sticking to them, I think is really critically important. And I'd love to hear a few others around, and I have other ideas around how men can support women, but love to hear some examples of what we as women can do to take more control over this.
I think you have to have a plan. I know there are a lot of women that are really good at having a plan and mapping out their careers, and I will say, I had that plan, but life comes and goes, and sometimes you might have to modify that plan, and at that time you're modifying for what you think is the right reasons. But I think you have to pause and say, do I really need to modify my plan? What will that do for me in the long run? So this thing about taking risks and trying new things, I know that well, if I do that, I might not be successful. I think that little voice in the back of our minds, we have to shut that down. So I want to say that it's around, taking more control of your life and your career, and not being responsible for everybody else's. Put yourself up the top of that list. The other thing I wanted to say is this whole thing around networking, because I hear this this thing, women need to be able to network more. But I will tell you, my observation has been at lunchtime, I go out and ask people to have lunch. Well, no, I'm going to eat at my desk because I want to leave at 5 o'clock and I have something to do. I will tell you, I've never seen a man eat at his desk. Okay. They always 12 to 1 is blocked on everybody's calendar. And you think this is a simple thing. This is a real thing. I go out, they're out in groups, they're having lunch. They're not talking about anything, but they're building some type of rapport that helps them when they go back to the office. So I think as women, what we can do is ask to come to lunch, invite men to lunch, sit down, have that informal conversation that will make it easier when you go back and you have to discuss business. So I think that networking, getting comfortable in the non-business conversation will make you even more comfortable in the business conversation.
Yeah.
So that's my input.
I know I used this example before, but I think it's interesting along the lines of that. I had a guy who was in innovation at Boehringer Ingelheim, who I worked with, and he actually instituted something called lunch roulette at Boehringer Ingelheim. And so essentially it was this fun thing where it was a little program you'd go on to, and it would assign you 3 new people you should go have lunch with, and that were in close proximity to you. And that really encouraged you to get out and to meet others and to mingle and exchange and share ideas. So, there's some really interesting and fun applications of how you can really encourage that and not sit at your desk, but really get out there and meet others across many different levels and et cetera.
Right. And I recently started with a company, and we're moving to a new building, and the CEO is from the UK, and his mandate is that it's an open plan, that there are no walls, there is no hierarchy, there is no eating lunch at your desk allowed, that everybody is required to eat down in, he calls it a restaurant, I hope that it is, but really this whole thing about how that social networking time breaks down barriers, increases communications, so that I think then you're more open to unbiased assessment in the workplace. I'm hoping that's what happens. I'm also hoping I'm going to be able to concentrate when I go to work, but I'll worry about that later. But I would say that's really a best practice in the leadership. And as a result of that type of atmosphere, he's got tremendous retention for his organization in the UK.
That's right.
Well, I think that's a great point. I love that idea of, not eating lunch at your desk. And how many men mentors have we heard who have said that? Most of them will tell you that. Don't eat lunch at your desk. So I think that's really important. And it's good advice that we can all take to heart.
Great. We have another Laurie Cook Pearl here. Work with your male and female colleagues to agree to point out examples of bias. If it's always the woman who points things out, she can be marginalized. When multiple people point things out, it will be harder to be ignored. Right on, sister.
Yep.
Never Eat Alone. All this eating, the book, Never Eat Alone. We're talking a lot about it, but it's a big thing. It really is. And that it offers such an opportunity to network and then to break down those barriers. Right. So we're getting close to the close of our program. Do we have any final thoughts, Laurie Lucas, on this topic? I mean, you know, I'm mad as heck, and I'm not going to stand for this anymore. Anything like that?
Well, I think that we're doing the right thing by starting the conversation. And I hope that this will inspire other people to have more of those conversations, and to bring men into that conversation, I think is really important as well, too. It's not just a women thing. You know, I really like Kelly's comment about that we have to make this about transformation and not about men versus women, that it's an all-inclusive thing. And I think that we can make a lot of progress with it, especially if we keep having the conversation. So it's a great way to start.
Yeah.
Great. And Sarah, any final words of wisdom? We've really enjoyed having you tonight. It's a wealth of information that really makes us want to move and make things better. How can we continue on this path?
Well, I think it's a lot of what we talked about, but I mean, and this is, you know, it's bring the men in your lives into the fold. I think is a really important thing, and I think it's how can you be both men and women? How can you really encourage them to be a champion for gender diversity? Certainly, getting women into leadership positions cannot be achieved until men support their career progression. So when we talked about the advocacy and the support, you know, I think it's great for everyone to go back and you know, a lot of men have daughters, and so you know, you can often broach the conversation about, you know, don't you want these opportunities available to your daughters too? And everyone's going to think, you know, hey, you know, lots of things have changed, but there's data here to support that things haven't changed all that much. And so we'd have to be able to have those conversations and say, do we really, you know, your daughter, do you really want to wait 117 more years? Your daughter's not even going to be able to be part of this if we don't do something now and start chipping away at it faster than that. So how do we get more men and women alike to be a champion for gender diversity? How do we be a mentor? And especially we as women leaders, how do we be a leader, a mentor, and an advocate for other young women as well? Like, don't, you know, again, send the elevator back down and really choose folks that you can help shepherd. I think men, too, really encourage them to arrange inclusive networking opportunities. So again, we're participating in it right now in a networking opportunity that doesn't have a lot of men itself.
They were invited. Everybody was invited. Absolutely. But you know, I have to look at
everyone is invited. Here. It's more about how are we able to create networks, and men often are better at and have more opportunities to network. So how can we encourage men to help us shift the balance by arranging networking events that are inclusive of both genders? And then the other thing is we always have to check our bias. I've even heard, you know, I've heard women even be catty of other women, and we as women have to check our own biases. And I think that's really important. It does start with us, but make sure that you get the men in your lives, at your work, your husbands, your sons, your partners, to really start having this conversation as well.
Yeah, excellent. Sarah, what's the name of your book again? Because I'm sure everybody on this lab is going to want to run out and get this.
Oh,
I think that
yeah. Look, here it is.
There, it's called Nimble, Focused, and Feisty.
Nimble, Focused, Feisty, Organizational Cultures That Win in the New Era and How to Create Them. It's
buy that for every man and woman in your life that you love. I want to say, let's stop talking about it and let's start doing it. I want to thank Sarah and Laurie Lucas and Leah and all the comments in our chat stream there. If you are a member of the HBA, you will be able to get a copy of Sarah's slides, along with the recorded program, which will be posted on the Splab. We will also be pushing out this recorded program to anyone in the HBA community platform. It's been a pleasure having you all, and I wish you continued success moving the needle in your own organization and sending the elevator back down for somebody. So good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.